Hey everybody, this is Robert from Black Belt Gaming. I'm about to go into the different character classes and talk about each of those that are in the core rules of first edition AD&D. But before I do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ability scores and kind of the lack of a mechanic for attribute tests. This will kind of work its way into as I'm talking about some of the different classes later, such as the thief class. So what did you do in AD&D when you needed to make some sort of check? Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition, there were a lot of subsystems. There were a lot of different ways that you could adjudicate different situations. And there were almost so many different little systems that you could use that it could be overwhelming. So especially if you tried to take all of that in and just play 100% by the book. The great thing is it just gives you a lot of options. So if you kind of understand the spirit of first edition AD&D or at least as many people played it, you kind of had your own opinions about maybe how to adjudicate this situation and make a check or a roll for something. And you could choose, as a DM, a dungeon master, you could choose the way that you thought was best. Right now you're looking at a little cartoon drawing there from the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I used to think about that one. You know, this is basically some kind of intimidation attempt. You've got this barbarian who's thrown his axe into the wall, and the barkeep there is sweating it pretty hard, and the other guys are saying, hey, you know, you better give him what he wants. So would you just role play that situation? Probably in many instances you would, but what if you wanted to make some kind of check? If you happen to see my video on my very first game playing Dungeons & Dragons, there was a moment where the DM made me make a check against my constitution. And I don't know exactly what he did or what he rolled, but he asked me for my score and he made a check accordingly, and then he told me whether I could or couldn't go forward with my action. So let's talk about some of the ways that people did decide to include a die roll, not just role play through it. So let's say we're looking at this situation like here at the bar, and somebody wants to intimidate others. How would we handle that? Well, when we were talking about rolling ability scores, you had this nice bell curve that was in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and most of your ability scores were going to fall somewhere between 9 and 12. That was kind of the average. You'd basically roll 4 dice, pick the best 3. It gave your adventurer a chance to be just a little bit above average. In the days now, in current times, when characters are being made for 4th edition, 3rd edition, Pathfinder, and these others, character scores tend to be, in comparison, quite a bit inflated. They tend to be much higher. So you run into other problems that way, which I might talk about later. But let's take a look at the D20, just a simple D20 roll. This was a way that you could very easily and quickly handle a situation. You've got the barbarian attempting to intimidate. Well, maybe it's his size and his strength. So maybe you go with a strength roll. Maybe he has a strength of 16. Well above average. Pretty strong guy. You could just say as a DM, alright, make a strength check. And that check is simply a D20 roll. And we got a 4. And in this instance, lower is better. So if you roll equal to or less than your ability score, you succeeded. And a dungeon master might give you a bonus or a penalty, maybe +2. if something is rather easy, or maybe a minus to your roll if something is difficult, maybe affecting your score. So like if it was a minus, maybe it was a -4, then your score would go from 16 down to 12, so you'd need to roll a 12 or less. Or any way you wanted to do the math, it was just totally up to the DM. But a simple D20 check with any bonuses or that kind of modifiers you wanted to throw in there, that was totally up to the DM. Many times it was just a straight D20 roll, less than or equal to your ability score. Easy enough. Another kind of check that is used by some AD&D players, it actually was inspired, I think, by one of the spells from the player's handbook. I can't recall off the top of my head which one it was, but if you read through the spell descriptions, I think it's one of the illusionist spells. There is a spell in there that makes you roll 3d6, and you need to get less than your, I think it's intelligence, in order to see through this illusion or something. And people thought, oh, that's an easy way to just kind of make a die roll and see if somebody's figured something out or not. Well, for an easy check, instead of using a d20, you could use 2d6. And you need to roll, once again, under your ability score. 3d6, those are the dice that on average you would use to generate your character. According to basic D&D rules. That's going to give you the basic bell curve there, with 9 to 12 being the average. So once again, kind of a standard check, 3d6, roll under your ability score. So let's say our barbarian's trying to intimidate. We roll these, and we need to get less than his score of 16, if we chose it to be strength. With 3rd edition, they really pushed the intimidate checks being linked to charisma. You could do that if you wanted to. But just depends, your judgment. If you wanted to make the check more difficult, we talked about with the D20 roll adding a bonus or putting in some kind of penalty. You can do that with the dice. There's an easier check. A little more difficult. If you wanted to make it even harder, maybe it's a difficult check, make them roll 4. They got to get, maybe the room is full of other soldiers and maybe they're not so easily intimidated. He's got to get under his ability score. So adding all these up, that's 6, 10, 11, 12, 13. He's still under 16, so he still made an impression. And then if something is just really, really hard, I got a little d6 here, but you could even add in a 5th one. And that gives you a pretty good range. Because if you're talking within something within the 3 to 18 range and you're rolling 5 dice and trying to get your score or lower, that's not easy to do. So that's just a very visual way to just add some difficulty as things become more challenging for the player. So there's another way to make some attribute tests. Another method I read about, which it might possibly be the oldest method that I've ever read about. This is all hearsay for me, because I wasn't there and I don't know. But I've heard that it's possible that one of the oldest methods of trying to see whether you succeed or fail at something that's not combat related, or you're trying to just see if you can figure something out or get by with this, that, and the other, is to make a saving throw and have the dungeon master decide which saving throw is the most appropriate to the situation, whether it's connected in some way to your physical strength or your willpower or whatever. Make the saving throw. Remember, the old AD&D saving throws look a little different. Let's take a quick look at them. Here they are in the book. You've got the different classes and levels over here, but they're into about 5 categories: paralyzation, poison, death magic, Next one, Petrification Polymorph. Rod, staff or wand, breath weapon, and spell. So you kind of have to use your judgment to see which one of those might be the best. Especially if you needed to make some check regarding your character's luck or something, if they were able to pull something off. So let's think about this. What if we tried to do an intimidate check? What would we use here? I need to think about this for a minute. You know, I've been sitting here thinking about this for just a little bit. This is not a particular method that I used, but I did find doing some research. I'm not really sure what I would choose if I were to choose one of these saving throws to serve as some sort of ability check. But anyway, if you wanted to follow this method, you'd find your class and whatever level you were, and then kind of following the rules, you could add a bonus or a penalty depending upon the situation, and have them make the saving throw. So they've got to roll equal to or over this number on a d20. Another way you can attempt some rolls is actually pulling from Call of Cthulhu or the basic role-playing system, which is also an old game, been around a long time, and has some similarities with its statistics here with intelligence and dexterity and all of that. You've got things like this, an effort roll. You take your strength score and multiply it by 5, and you're going to get a percentage. And if you look at some of these others, you've got like a stamina roll, constitution times 5, an idea roll, intelligence times 5. Some good guidelines there if you wanted to take the Dungeons and Dragons numbers and come up with a percentage. So if we went back to the example of the barbarian maybe using his strength and size to intimidate the others at the bar, say we wanted to make some sort of effort roll here related to his strength, we take his strength of 16, multiply that by 5, and we come up with an 80. So he's got an 80% chance to pull this off. So roll your percentile dice and see if you get an 80 or less. If you're looking for some other sources to pull from, got Castles and Crusades here. This is kind of, some kind of say it's kind of a different 3rd edition. You know, we had 1st edition, 2nd edition. Castles and Crusades was based off of the earlier editions of D&D and brought in some of the D20 mechanics without making things real complicated as they became with the 3rd edition, 3.5, and Pathfinder. So pulling from here, we actually can see some of the saves directly related to these ability scores. So this was a neat way to do the different saving throws, and I noticed that something like this may have even been an influence on the 5th edition, which is just coming out now for Dungeons and Dragons. But strength was going to help you against paralysis and constriction, intelligence, wisdom. We can see how it's connected here. And so if you wanted to use that saving throw system, this kind of thing might give you an idea of what kind of situation it might involve. So let's say they're trying to make that intimidation check. What ability would be best connected to that? Probably, let's say, strength. Then we might want to make a save against paralysis. Yeah, I hope that's making sense. It's kind of a complicated way to figure this out, but back when I was looking at the AD&D saves, I wasn't sure which one I'd use, but these kind of saves seem to be related to strength, and so maybe that's a good one to choose to see if he's intimidating enough to pull off his efforts there to intimidate everybody at the bar. And in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons core rulebooks for 1st edition, like I said, you have these different subsystems. So open a door. If you're rolling a d6, this will give you some information. So let's take a look at that strength 16. You're going to need a 1, 2, or a 3 to open a door. And this is not just an average door, but this is trying to, you know, muscle your way through a barrier. You need a 1, 2, or a 3. So it's almost a 50-50 chance. So if you wanted to look up something quick there and use that for the intimidation check, well, maybe you could. Maybe throwing the axe into the wall added a little bonus there, so maybe you'd make it a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, and he's going to succeed. There's just lots of different ways to try this out. So throughout the books, with the different ability scores, here's dexterity. You'll see some different bonuses. Sometimes it's a percentage for something, and maybe you can find a way to work that into your check in some way that makes the most sense to you. Some of you may remember that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons also gave us the old secondary skills table. It didn't really give us a way to make a check to determine whether we were successful at something or not. Say if we rolled on this table and our character had some background as a gambler, then, you know, how would we determine if he was successful or not if he decided to go to the local tavern and you know, play some dice games or something? Would you just role play that, or would you want to make some kind of check, some kind of saving throw? It was totally up to the dungeon master, but the secondary skills table just gave you some guidance and some extra, you know, totally optional information if you wanted to use it, but it just kind of lets you know some of the things your character was good at that were kind of independent of his class and of his combat role. So there we have it. I just thought I would talk a little bit about the different ways you could make ability checks or attribute checks or skill checks in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition. I'd be interested to know in the comments below how you handled them. Did you role play everything, or did you make some checks from time to time? And next I'll be moving into the classes, and I might refer to making checks here and there. So I hope you'll join me later for that. Thanks everybody.